All right, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from across the globe, to another Veeam LinkedIn live session with myself and David. If you've joined us before, you guys probably know we're here to talk about AWS and everything cloud. So a couple of introductions before we get kicked off. My name's Sam Nichols, Director of Product Marketing for all things public cloud, so AWS, Azure, GCP primarily here at Veeam. And I'm joined by my colleague, compatriot, friend, Mr. David Hill. David,
no more tag on there. Hello everyone. I'm Global Technologist in the Product Strategy Office of the CTO at Veeam, and much like Sam, I focus on a lot of the public cloud stuff that we're doing, like AWS and Azure and Kubernetes and that kind of thing.
All the fun stuff, right? We get all the fun, new, exciting pieces to talk about. And
yeah,
you're the brains, man. So
cloud native. That's what we're all about.
All right, cool. Well, if you haven't joined one of these before, what we'd like to do is a little bit of a quiz to see where you guys are dialing in from. So post in the comments where in the world you're joining us from today, and we'll touch through this a few times throughout the conversation to see where everyone is. Like, we're a nice big global community, so we've got a nice map of North America here. David's in Texas. Our video guy, Mark, making all of this magic happen, is based in Georgia, and then myself, I'm up there in Wisconsin, where the cold is upon us. And then our fantastic social media manager, Katrinel, is joining us from Romania as well. So also pivotal to making this happen. So write in the comments where you're joining us from. We'll revisit this map and see how many ones that we can get filled in green. Now, while we're live and, it's just myself and David that you can see on the screen here, we do like to keep things as interactive as possible. So any questions, comments, requests that you guys have, post them in the comments box, and we'll make sure that we get to those throughout the call. But today's topic is all around kind of AWS cost effectiveness, how to make that bill that you get each and every single month as small as possible, right? AWS, they are, customer obsessed. They define that as themselves, and they actively go out of their way to actually help customers reduce their bills. And we'll get onto that in a little bit, but the cloud promises to be a cost-effective place to store data, run production workloads. David, talk to us a little bit about that kind of shift to the cloud, especially from a cost-effective angle, and why folks are doing that.
Yeah, there's kind of a few tiered approaches to why people are shifting to the cloud. And when you think about the cost being one of them, it's a switch from an operational expenditure model a capital expenditure model to an operational expenditure model. So you've heard over the years people talk about CapEx and OpEx. And if you think about how the world is changing in general, even outside of technology, more and more people are buying less things and they're leasing them and renting them. So if you think about cars, more people lease a car now than they actually do buy cars. Same with like all your subscription services, whether it's your TV or whatever you're doing, most things now are built around a subscription model rather than just an outright purchase. And it's the same in the technology space with infrastructure. More and more people now, instead of going out and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on servers and racks and networking and everything, are just looking at the cloud where they can just go and spin up the workloads that they need and just pay for it on a monthly basis. So that kind of subscription operational expenditure model. And that's driving a big change. But also we've seen with the pandemic as well over the past year or so, a massive driver from moving from being able to just go into your data center, go and replace hard drives, go and do some break fix to your infrastructure. Because of lockdowns and things, it's not been possible to do that. So more and more people have moved to the cloud because of this, because they can just go and spin up workloads without having to worry about, well, this hard drive's failed. What am I going to do? Oh, well, I best go restore this workload to the cloud. So a mixture of the spending habits and also the changes in the whole world has driven this massive growth into the public cloud over the past year or so.
Okay, so essentially people are moving there because we're changing to this kind of pay-as-you-go model. There's that lower initial capital investment. There's none of the hardware to ultimately procure, manage, maintain, upgrade, fix. It's just, much more cost effective, but also easier. It's incredibly scalable and flexible. We can expand it up and shrink it down as our needs happen. So ultimately, the public cloud and AWS is a cost-effective place, or can be a cost-effective place to store your data, whether you're targeting backups there or maybe even running production workloads. But one of the things that we kind of keep hearing about is this concept of AWS bill shock, right? And it's not just exclusive to AWS. It happens in any service, any public cloud. This, you start consuming everything. Everything's very easy to consume, but all of a sudden we get our monthly bill and it's thousands, tens of thousands. I've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars every single month to run things in the public cloud, and you kind of get that bill shock. So, David, talk to us about some of the things that AWS are doing to help avoid that bill shock piece.
Yeah, it's certainly the bill shock's quite easy. It doesn't matter what your budget is, whether it's like a few $100 a month or a few thousand or $100,000 a month. It's very easy to spend money in the cloud. There's lots of different charges for things, whether it's like taking data out or bringing data in, network bandwidth, that kind of thing. So if you're not fully aware of all the charges, you can build up a significant bill very quickly. Now, from an AWS perspective, things like budgeting and monthly reports and that kind of thing, there's a lot of billing and budgeting and cost management built into the public cloud now. So you can actually start setting alerts with thresholds, things like that, and actually run actions based on these thresholds against what you're doing in the cloud. So, for example, you can set a threshold to say, I only want to spend $1,000 a month, and when it gets to 75%, go and run these particular actions. And you can actually go and shut down EC2 instances. You can go and actually even depending on what you're doing, you can go and put blocks on things to stop the actual amount going over that $1,000. So while being aware of what you're doing in the cloud is important, you can also put in places all these forecasting and budgets as well. And when you go in AWS and you look at a lot of the cost management perspective, there's things in there as well that actually gives you forecasted costs. So based on what your usage is at the moment, it will tell you what your bill's going to be over the next month and stuff like that. So while it's easy to just go and deploy whatever you want and spin up whatever you want, you need to be aware of what you're actually getting charged for. And it's not just, I've spun up a VM, I'm going to pay for that VM. There's all these different costs around ingress and egress and traffic and data storage and snapshots and stuff like that.
So ultimately, AWS, like I say, proactively going out there to help people shrink their bill, even though they're profiting off of it with their cost management services. Like you say, reports, budgeting, forecasting, recommendations, even their cost anomaly tool as well. So ultimately, just helping people stay on top of that bill, so it's less of a shock at the end of the month. So we kind of looked at this from the AWS perspective. I do want to pivot and look at how Veeam does it from a data management and data protection perspective. But I think now's a good time to go and take a look at the map and see where we've got folks joining us from. Okay, so we've got some folks from Mexico. I see Florida. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. If we move over to Europe, okay, some folks from the UK, our compatriots, hello. Germany, Netherlands. Fantastic. So this is good. It's good. South Africa, India, Kuwait, Dubai. Man, I'm really having my geography tested right now. I'm just waiting to embarrass myself, right? So got a lot of folks coming across from all different time zones. So we really appreciate you joining us today and hoping you're enjoying the show. So we've just discussed, what AWS do to help control that bill shock, help control costs in the cloud. But let's start to look at it from a Veeam perspective and a data protection perspective. So, if you pay attention to our releases, which I hope you do, we just released version 11 at the beginning of this year, which had a massive new feature that was focused on helping control the cost of storing data, which was archive tier. So that's the ability to intelligently lifecycle backups from, maybe performance-driven tiers on premises, spinning disk on premises, into varying different tiers within AWS object storage. We could already write to Amazon S3, but there's multiple different tiers that get colder and colder and subsequently cheaper and cheaper. So, David, why don't you talk to us a little bit about archive tier?
Yeah, so what it allows you to do, as you mentioned, is move the data between the different storage platforms out in the public cloud. So we can see here, for example, some of the different costs. Now, originally, like in Veeam Backup and Replication version 10, you could only take your backups and offload them out to Amazon S3. Now you can see here that that's pretty cheap anyway. And certainly when you look at the cost there of 0.023 gig a month, it's not very expensive. But then you compare that to Glacier, and that's even cheaper. So what we actually can do now is you can take your backups, you can store them in your on-premises data center. So when you think about things like the 3-2-1 rule, now for those of you who are not familiar with the 3-2-1 rule, it's a backup best practice that's been around a long time, where you have 3 copies of your data with across 2 different media types with at least 1 off-site. Now, what this allows you to do is essentially store data in different locations in the event of accidental deletion or corruption or anything. But storing your data off-site, when we offload this to S3, as I mentioned, pretty cheap. But now what we can do with the archive tier is, after a set number of days and through a policy-based solution, you can actually define when you want to move that data to these different locations and based around the cost. So when we look at S3 Glacier and then Deep Archive as well, it gets really, really cheap. There's obviously a drawback to that, as in when it's in Glacier Deep Archive, it takes a lot longer to get the data out. So you need to understand what your recovery time objectives are. But essentially across these different tiers, you have the ability to now store your backup data in these different locations and essentially reduce your costs of not only your on-prem data storage, but also your off-premises data storage for long-term data archival. So when you're looking at like compliance models, things like that, whether you're a fintech or a healthcare provider or whatever certification requirements you have for keeping like patient data for 12 months, 24 months, maybe 5 years, whatever it is, you can now leverage these different tiers in object storage to help significantly reduce your long-term data storage requirements.
Absolutely. And we've got a solution called Veeam One as well, which is part of Veeam Availability Suite, that's going to kind of give you that proactive capacity planning piece as well, to really help you understand like how much you're putting in the cloud and extrapolate from that how much is ultimately going to cost you. So that's great from a data protection perspective of, workloads running on premises, initially storing them on premises for that high performance and gradually tiering them off into the cloud. But more and more workloads are running in the cloud now, and Veeam can protect those as well. We have an AWS native backup solution, Veeam Backup for AWS. You can consume that, kind of as a standalone solution by itself just to protect data in AWS, or as part of Veeam Backup and Replication, which was David was talking about. If you have a hybrid or multi-cloud environment, it can centralize everything there. But when we're talking about protecting workloads within the public cloud, it's very important that we take a native approach, again, from a cost perspective. Now, when it comes to these like Amazon EC2 instances, our primary mechanism of data protection is a snapshot. And these snapshots live on these EBS volumes that you see on the screen here at 5 cents per gig per month. And if you primarily rely on snapshots alone, that can get very, very expensive, especially if we have to retain data for a lengthy period of time, whether that's for our own peace of mind, whether that's for internally enforced mandates or external compliance requirements. So what I wanted to show you is how we can leverage these different tiers and that intelligent backup data lifecycle management that's present in this native product, as well as the product David was talking about, to ultimately drive down those costs without sacrificing our retention pieces. So I've got right here, let's just say we've got to keep data for 12 months and I've got a 100 gigabyte machine, and ultimately to keep a snapshot of that for 12 months is going to cost me $60 a year. Simple piece of math, right? It's just the 5 cents per gig per month times 100 times 12. There you go, $60 per month. And that might not sound like a lot, but that's just one machine and a relatively small machine. We work with customers that are dealing with thousands, tens of thousands of instances in AWS. So you start to multiply it by that, and you can see where we come across customers that were literally spending hundreds of thousands of dollars every single month on just the backup component, nothing else. So in version 3, the current version of our AWS native product, we can tier that off onto Amazon S3. You simply create some policy-based automation, and maybe we decide to keep the snapshot on EBS for a month. Because the snapshot's good, it gives us very, very low RTOs. And as it ages, it just automatically tiers off onto S3, lives there for 11 months until it's subsequently deleted. Now, S3 is just 2.3 cents per gig per month, so it's less than half of that. So already you can see that we can slash that bill in half down to just over $30 just by tiering that off onto Amazon S3. And then we also have the wonderful thing of compression. We can compress up to 2x. So all of a sudden you can compress those backups and cut that down even lower at just $17.65. So already looks much, much more appetizing than that $60 that we were dealing with previously. But in version 4, which is coming in a few weeks now, and we spoke about at VeeamON, we're introducing support for Amazon S3 Glacier and S3 Glacier Deep Archive. So on the next the next slide, we're showing, maybe we keep a month's worth of snapshots on EBS, we then transition it off onto S3, and then as the likelihood to need to recover from that data diminishes, we push it onto colder and colder storage. We know that it takes a lot longer to restore from Deep Archive, but what's the chances of us having to restore something that's 6, 9, 12 months old? Relatively small. Right? Again, we're kind of probably keeping that in line with retention requirements. So S3 Glacier Deep Archive is like 50x cheaper than the EBS volumes we're talking about. So I forget how many zeros and nines it is. It's like 0.00999 cents per gig per month. So all of a sudden we've got that down to just over $11. And then again with that Veeam compression, just over $8. So all of a sudden we've taken those costs of $60 a month when multiplied out across all of our machines, very, very high, and brought that down by multiple fold, 6, 7, 8 fold. So we can really help cut those costs down without sacrificing, data retention requirements. Again, whether that's because of compliance or we just want to keep it to have our backs covered. So, Veeam does a fantastic job at helping our customers cut those costs, not just in AWS, but in Azure and GCP as well. The same kind of functionality is available. And like AWS, we want to give you that proactive insight into how much that's going to cost you every month. So built within our policy is a cost calculator. And we've actually got a slide with a little bit of a screenshot of that for you that I'm sure David would be happy to walk you through there, just to kind of give you a feel for what it looks like, how it works.
Yeah, so when you look at this built-in cost calculator and the cost estimation, what this is actually showing you is based on an AWS list price. So if you've negotiated any discounts with AWS, they won't be reflected in this. It's purely just AWS list prices of what the list price is today. So it is dynamic. It changes with AWS's prices. But this is showing you how much it costs to store the snapshots based on what your policies are, how much it is to replicate those snapshots to different AWS accounts or regions, how much it is to store the actual backups in S3, and also traffic and transaction costs. Now, the traffic and transaction costs are quite interesting because from an AWS perspective, any data that you move within the region, there's no costs. But as soon as you move data out of those regions, you incur traffic costs and transaction costs. So essentially what we're seeing here is we're being told that there's some costs involved around the traffic, which means when you look at the replicas, for example, there's a cost for the replica. This screenshot Sam's showing you is actually one of my own production workloads. It's my unified network controller that runs my whole house, and I run it in AWS as a great example of kind of eating my own dog food. And what this is showing you is I actually replicate this to another AWS account in a different region. So if something happens to my AWS account, I have a copy of this in another AWS account with a whole different security credentials, security profiles in a different data center. So if if the particular data center it's in, an Amazon data center catches fire or whatever, we've seen this before, I still have a copy of this. So I can very quickly power it on and restore my home network if I need to. But because I'm replicating across regions, we're incurring traffic costs because we're actually moving data out of that region into another region. And then the transaction costs are around like put and get requests into object storage. Because, as Sam mentioned, we do a lot of compression and we move stuff off to object storage, you get charged for put and get requests in object storage. So we're seeing what the transaction costs are as well around that. So it's very granular. But as you can see, from my own perspective, paying just over $4 a month to protect this workload is minimal cost to myself, and it's worth that in the knowledge that I can go and restore this very quickly and very easily if I need to.
All right.
A lot of great in-depth information. But the good thing about it as well is when you're creating these backup policies, you just kind of get this quick insight into what this is. So if you're only paying like $100 a month to run a particular workload, and then all of a sudden, you're implementing a backup policy that's going to cost you $1,000 a month, that's probably not what you want to be doing. So it gives you that insight into that. So it's really powerful from that perspective.
All right, fantastic. So I think it's time to turn to some questions. While we see them, just kind of post them in our little side chat here. Maybe we can switch to the map and see where everyone else is joining us from as we kind of bring this one to a close. I'm sure it will come up in just a second. And while they bring it up, I'll get to one of the questions. We've got a question. There we go. All right, let's have a look. So there's Canada, got the South Africa there. Looks like Indonesia. Man, really testing my geography here as well. So we've gone through the UK, Netherlands, Germany, Romania, Venezuela, Pakistan. So lots of folks joining us from around the world. Thank you once again. Let's start to get to some of these questions now. So Mike on Facebook asks, is it possible to access S3 Glacier Deep Archive for restore, or do we need to use Amazon Dashboard to move them back to S3 Glacier before we do that? David, that's a great question for you.
It is a really good question. So no, you don't have to go into the Amazon Dashboard to actually move these workloads. Everything that we do is automatic. So if we go and tier off some backups into Deep Archive, and then depending on what the time period elapsed is, if you want to go and restore those, we will automatically pull them out of Deep Archive for you. You don't have to go and do it manually. Now, as I mentioned, there's considerations around RTOs because any data that you pull out of Deep Archive takes a considerable amount of time, but it's all auto magically done on the back end. You don't have to go in and do anything manually in AWS. So great question.
Yep. And then we've got a question from Leon on LinkedIn as well, who asks, is it possible to use intelligent tiering from AWS as well? So I think I understand this question right. Like, can we ultimately get, data on different tiers within AWS outside of AWS? And the easy answer to that question is yes. So Veeam, we always use a portable backup format. It's the VBK, or when it's on object storage, it's the OVBK, but it is a portable, self-describing backup format. And you absolutely can do backup copy jobs out of data that's stored in Amazon S3 from, an EBS snapshot that's protecting an EC2 instance, and bring that on premises. You can copy it on premises. You could even push it off into another cloud if you want. And that really kind of ties Veeam's story up really nicely, provided that I've understood your question correctly, and please post if I haven't and we can get to it. But ultimately, we are here, we build the technology, we have a partner ecosystem, and we have the licensing model to ultimately let you have any cloud your way, right? So whether it's private, public, hybrid, multi, whether you want it self-managed or as a service, Veeam ultimately just gives you the technology to put your data where you need it. And I think that that's really important as we see, cloud acceleration continue to ramp, right? Folks wanting to move on-premises applications and workloads into AWS. But it's also important from the other perspective and the other way around as well. We see the cloud becoming kind of the de facto standard for, developing and deploying new applications within an organization. And that's great when those applications are relatively small, but as they scale out, they get bigger, there's bigger data sets, they become more intensive, they become more popular with more IO, the cost just gets so much to the point where the cost of effectiveness of the cloud is sometimes not as good as the cost effectiveness on premises. And we start to see organizations wanting to repatriate those workloads back on premises once those applications reach a certain level of maturity, right? The kind of cost of revenue of running in the cloud is just too much. It'd just be better running it on premises. So again, Veeam really now allows you to do that. There's no platform lock-in on any of our platforms. We'll let you put your data, to, from, within, anywhere that you want to. It's all about being as non-prescriptive as possible. Let's have a look, see if we've got any other questions. Question from Abdullah on LinkedIn. What happens in the backup process if the connection is lost? Does it redo the backup from scratch?
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting question. So two ways to look at this is the way that we do backups in AWS, using Veeam Backup for AWS, is all driven through the AWS APIs. So once Veeam Backup for AWS says, I want to go do a backup, whether it's we go and take a snapshot or we're offloading to S3 or whatever, that's all done through the AWS APIs. So we're essentially initiating a procedure on the back end of the AWS infrastructure. So it's not like we're actually doing a copy over a particular LAN connection or something like that. So it's all API driven. So you typically wouldn't lose a connection. But if there's any timeouts on the backups or anything, you can actually specify how many times you want to retry and stuff like that. So it will always try and complete the backup task if there's any timeouts or anything like that.
Awesome. Getting towards the bottom of the hour, it looks like Dan also wants some help setting up cross-account capabilities. So cross-account, great for isolating backups from production, good security best practices. Dan, I'm not sure if you're on LinkedIn or Facebook, but if you want to add myself on LinkedIn and shoot me a message, and I'll make sure that we get you some help there just to get that all functioning. So I believe I'm linked in the LinkedIn posting or whatever. So feel free to add me. shoot me a message and I'll make sure that we get you some help there. But that kind of brings it to an end. Now, we always like to help you guys get hands-on. So we've got a fantastic offer, which is available on that QR code as well as that short URL on the screen. Essentially, you can get started with AWS native backup and recovery for free. There's unlimited coverage for 30 days. I'm also going to give you $250 in AWS credits to help offset your costs. So scan that barcode, you just register on a landing page, and and then ultimately we'll deliver the licenses to you. And once deployed, you get the free credits. Or alternatively, just type in that short URL. I believe it's in the comments as well, so you can just link to it from there. And then if you love it, and I'm sure you will, when it comes around to buying it, you'll actually get 3 months free as well when you buy. So essentially 25% off of the actual product itself. So it's a Veeam exclusive offer, free backup for 30 days, $250 in credits, 3 months free or 25% off when you buy. You can get that just by registering at that link there. So that kind of brings us to a close. Now, we do a number of LinkedIn Lives, and it's not just myself and David, and we've got a couple of upcoming. So Monday is Industry Insights. That's with the ever-famous Jason Buffington and Dave Russell, where they're going to be kind of going through the Gartner Magic Quadrant and dissecting that for you guys. So that's absolutely a must-not-miss one. We're named leader for 5 times in a row and best on execution as well for 2 years in a row. So great from Veeam there, but make sure to join that one. And then next Friday's show is Melissa Palmer and Aaron Murphy discussing why cyber attacks are disasters and need to be part of your BCDR plan. So make sure you join those ones. Great shows upcoming. We appreciate all of you joining us today from around the world. Thank you for the questions. I love it when it's interactive and we get to answer your questions directly. And have a great weekend, and we'll see you on one soon. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
If your AWS bill is too high, I've got something you should try.